Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm serving up a double helping of authorly goodness with my friends Lucy Burdette and Ang Pompano, both of whom have food-centric new mysteries out this summer. Lucy and Ang have been a part of the same writers group for decades now, and each considers the other, and third member Chris Falcone, an integral part of their success. Lucy, who in real life is clinical psychologist Roberta Islib, has just released the 11th entry in her Key West food critic mysteries featuring Haley Snow, A SCONE of Contention. Her other series include the Golf Lovers mysteries and the Advice Column mysteries featuring psychologist Rebecca Butterman. Lucy also has a standalone novel, Unsafe Haven, coming out this fall. Ang is the author of Diet of Death, the first in the reluctant food columnist mysteries featuring Quincy Luzaro, who secretly writes the popular Cooking with Betty column. His previous book, When It's Time for Leaving, was nominated for an Agatha Award for Best First Novel. Ang also writes and edits short stories and is a longtime member of the New England Crime Bake Planning Committee. Both Lucy and Ang have satisfied ravenous readers and critics alike with their new books. Kirkus praised Lucy's work as a scone-by-scone glorious tour of Scotland. Foodies and Outlander fans will rejoice in the references to both in this not-so-mysterious paean to Scotland. Author Susan Santangelo, reviewing for Suspense magazine, said Ang's Diet of Death is a real hoot of a mystery with a fast-moving plot and a fun cast of characters. Check it out. Having devoured both titles recently, I can assure you that the critics are right, and you're in for a real treat. But first, enjoy this virtual sit-down with Lucy Burdette and Ang Pompano. It's really the icing on a bookish bounty. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. I am very excited today. I have two great authors for you for the price of none, which is the greatest price in the world. We have Lucy Burdette, also known as Roberta Islib today. She is author of A SCONE of Contention, which is out right now. It's fresh and new. And also Ang Pompano, who is the author of Diet of Death, which came out a bit earlier this summer. And you two are longtime friends, members of the same writers group, and quite prolific. So welcome to the show. It's really fun to have you both here at the same time.
Thank you. And don't tell Angelo how much you paid me to appear.
I will not, because Roberta, Lucy, I'll pay you in candy or something, Ang, you know.
Okay.
Check your mailbox.
That works.
I mean, there's like a fee now, you know, you hit it that big, there's a fee, 11 books. And so anyway, I just thought I would start with the obvious. You both have brand new books out, so I'm wondering if you can sort of give us the quick setup or the elevator pitch so people get a taste for what these books are about. And I will start with you, Lucy.
Okay. So as John said, my book, which was out yesterday, is called A SCONE of Contention, and it's number 11 in the Key West Food Critic Mystery Series. And a lot of it takes place in Scotland, which is unusual since it has Key West in the title, but it's supposed to be the honeymoon for my character Haley Snow and her police detective handsome husband Nathan Bransford. And it gets complicated. They take their octogenarian neighbor along, and there a lot of Nathan's family show up. So it's not quite the dream honeymoon, but of course, this being a mystery, then murder ensues and Haley gets pulled in. So I wrote this during the pandemic when everybody was locked down and terrified, and it was really such a pleasure. So I hope that comes through.
Oh, it's a great little trip. And I should probably forewarn people, you were going to want scones, sweet scones, savory scones. You're going to be ready to kill for them. All right. And speaking of killing, Diet of Death, I mean, tell us all about it.
Yeah, well, Diet of Death is also a pandemic book for me because I had written When It's Time for Leaving, and it was a little heavier theme of the detective's father had Alzheimer's, and I wanted something lighter. So I started to do a follow-up to that, and it just wasn't going anywhere because I wasn't in the mood to do it. And if I'm not in the mood to do something, it's, I'm not going to be able to write it. So I had a story called Diet of Death in the Malice Domestic Mystery Most Edible. So my wife, Annette, said to me, well, why don't you make that into into a book. And so I had started, some of this before. So I said, sure, that's what I did. I worked on it. And it's a story of a guy, it's more of a lighthearted take on the food books that Lucy does. And so many others do so well too. So it's about a guy who wants to be an investigative reporter. His name is Quincy Lazaro. And he's tricked by his ex-college roommate to take a job writing a food column temporarily, just until Betty, who is, the name of the column is Cooking with Betty, just until she comes up from Baltimore so that she could take over the column. And then after that, he's going to get an investigative job. Well, as it turns out, Betty doesn't exist. And by this time, it's a hit column. The only problem is he doesn't know how to cook. So he has this octogenarian neighbor, Mary Ticcarelli, who helps him out with the recipes and everything. And Mary is kind of she has a Miss Marple quality. She can take incidents that from her family life and her community life, and she could, from that, figure out, problems. So Quincy has to interview a diet doctor. The diet doctor is murdered before the interview, and she encourages him to solve the problem, solve the mystery. And that's basically what it's about. It deals with male-female interpersonal relationships, a little bit with gender stereotypes, but it's more lighthearted than what I usually do.
Yeah, it's great escapist reading, and kudos to Annette for encouraging you to take a story and make it a novel. Good lady right there. So I did want to ask you, you guys, you've known each other for a very long time. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that you've been in a writing group together for decades now. I think that's
that's
true.
very true.
But I wanted to ask you a bit about that because, it can be very beneficial or not, depending on what you put into the group and what you get out of it. And obviously yours has worked quite well. So I thought I would start with you, Ange, and just ask if you can remember what the origins of this group were, and then maybe we'll break it a bit down more specifically.
Well, there are three of us in the group. There's Chris Falcone, who originally started the group. I don't want to tell you this, but it was more like 30 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And there's Roberta and there's myself in the group. It's been larger at different points over the years, but we kind of stuck it out. And it had all started way back, I think like 1988 or something, when Chris and I took an adult writing course at Guilford High School. And from there, it spread out. And,
It had a lot of versions. Some of them were you drop in and read, and we had all different kinds of people writing different genres, and that was okay, but not as helpful to me anyway as having people read ahead who know mysteries and know the characters.
Sure. And let me ask you too, I should say, I call you Lucy, Roberta sort of interchangeably because you have, many identities. But I wanted to ask you too, what, for people who might be looking to, set up a writer's group or restructure their own, what have you found to be sort of the best practices of your group or realistic expectations so that members get the most out of it?
I would say, don't commit to something until you've checked it out a couple of times and see what the feedback is. You want people who are serious about writing, and you want people who can focus on the bigger picture and not just, well, your grammar is incorrect here, or you left out a punctuation mark, because you could fix that. You can get a copy editor to fix that, but having somebody who can say to you, well, you're having your character do this, and she wouldn't do that. So they know, Ange and Chris know my characters as though they're real people. That's very helpful. I tell people the other writers don't always know how to fix something, but they know when something's not working.
Sure.
So if they both say, I stumbled over this paragraph, then I know, I trust them, and I go back and look at it and can figure out a way to fix it. And even when we had more people in the group and some of them didn't quite click, that's what I listen for, is where people are stuck in your manuscript. And you want people who are positive, but not Pollyanna,
Right.
because it doesn't help to say, oh, this is great, 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 great. But it also, writing is so hard and you spend so much time alone that it also doesn't help for people to tear you down. So it's finding that middle ground. What would you add to that, Angelo?
I agree with that. You have to get along, first of all, and the three of us do. And beyond that, we trust each other and we trust each other's instincts. And you have to have a thick skin sometimes, but not with Roberta and Chris as much as if it was a different group. I know that if Roberta says, well, you know, this really wouldn't happen, I can trust her, and she knows what she's talking about. But John, it's way more than just the writing help, as far as the manuscript. We're always, Roberta especially, is always sending us alerts and encouraging us and saying, well, you know, there's this agent that's looking for somebody. Or Chris might say, you know, I found a contest. And we help each other in that way too. So it goes beyond that. It goes beyond just the manuscript.
Sure, and I'm sure it's great moral support too, because unless you're a writer, you don't really understand, you know, the struggles and the emotional sort of trauma of being a writer. So it's nice to have a couple people who actually really get it and understand that, because writing is not easy, contrary to, you know, popular opinion. I just thought I'd ask quickly too, given that you both have new books out, can either of you recall a specific example or two where the writers group was really helpful or pivotal in fixing these manuscripts before they went to print?
Well, you asked that ahead, and of course, I can't remember anything that far back, but I can give you an example of the one that I'm finishing now, which is
Sure.
called A Dish to Die For, coming out next year. And my character, Nathan, who's Haley's husband, his father has dropped in to Key West for the first time, and he's been estranged from the family. So that's been fun to figure out what he's doing there and what he's like. And they both said to me, this guy just wouldn't talk this way. He's saying things like, dinner was lovely, or that looks delightful. And unless he's trying to be sarcastic, he wouldn't speak that way. So it's really helpful to have them know the whole evolution of the series, so they can point out, and also point out when a denouement is ridiculous, which often they are. You're in a hurry, you want to shove something in, and Ange or Chris will say, it's not working. So those are my examples.
Similar things have happened in my manuscripts too. They, will say, well, no, somebody wouldn't say that, or that won't work. Give suggestions. One thing that I was going to do in the last book, I was going to kill off the father at the end. And they said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. People like him, and they were right.
Sure, and never kill a cat, just
Right.
Never. You can do pretty much anything you want to people, but leave the cats alone. So let me ask you too, so both of your books feature food columnists or critics, and so people might think on the surface they're very similar, but they're actually not. They're very different in their writing, in their relationship to food. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about, these characters for people who might not be familiar with them, what their relationship to food is, and also how what they do for a living ends up lending itself to crime and investigation. And I will start with you, Lucy, and Haley Snow, who is now starred in 11 Key West mysteries, and she works for Key West magazine. So, this is a profession for her that lends itself very well to murder and mayhem. And
Right. So she's a food critic for that magazine, which means she has to go around trying the restaurants in Key West, which means I have to go around trying the restaurants. So that's just I just have to do it. It's my research. And a couple of rules of thumb. I don't give a bad review in a real restaurant. So if I have to have lousy food, I would make that up. And I don't poison anyone in a real restaurant because I'm not interested in ruining somebody's business. And Haley has gotten a lot more confident over the course of the series. She was young and dumb and kind of self-focused in that first book. So it's been interesting. I mean, I must have evolved too, or I'm not young, still dumb, but the food, she and her mother both love food. Her mother now lives on the island, and food is love to them. That's what it means. So if you're preparing a nice meal for somebody, you're taking care of them, you're offering something to them. She can't understand people who don't enjoy eating. And I know there are people who don't care about it, but that is not her. And as she goes to Scotland, then we get to taste all the scones and all the wonderful Scottish food. It's interesting because she also is a very good cook, as her mother has a catering business now in Key West. And people have said, a couple of people have said, oh, I really missed her cooking in Scotland, but she was on vacation, so there isn't that much of that. So it's interesting what people latch onto and what they miss.
Sure. And Ange, so you've already admitted you are not yourself, a foodie in terms of creating these elaborate dishes, but your wife Annette is, Lucy is. I'm wondering if you can tell us about Quincy, because he is sort of the opposite of Haley Snow. He's a reluctant columnist. He's sort of pretending to be Betty, this great, columnist of food, but he's really an aspiring novelist and he wants to get into investigative journalism. So can you give us a bit of his background and tell us how he is a very distinct character from Haley Snow?
Yes, well, it's the exact opposite of Haley, I would say. Quincy loves food, but he eats to live. And if he can make a tiramisu out of Twinkies, he's happy with that. If he could eat tuna fish out of the can, he's happy with that. That's the way he is. He, as you said, he would like to write a novel. He's trying to write a novel. And the other thing is he wants to be an investigative reporter. Now, Mary, on the other hand, would be more like Annette. She lives to cook. I won't say lives to eat, but lives to cook. And being a grandmotherly type, she wants to feed everybody. And she's a great cook because she's owned a restaurant. She also has that little quality where she's very inquisitive. So in that way, Quincy and Mary are alike. They're both very inquisitive, and she pushes him. He's kind of slow to get going into investigating this, but she pushes him a little bit.
Sure. And I have to say, one of the scenes I loved in your book, if I get this correctly, Quincy's out eating and he needs to write about tiramisu, and so he orders one from the restaurant just to look at. He looks at it and sends it away, and I said, oh my God, I would never do that. It would kill me. What power to him,
And wouldn't do that either.
I don't either.
Like, wow, that is restraint. So let me ask you about setting too, because setting, is very critical to these books, and it almost becomes a character in and of itself. So I will start with you. Let's see, who am I going to start with? I will start with you, Lucy. Why not? So, these books largely are set in Key West, where you winter. This book obviously is an exception because there's a honeymoon in Scotland. But can you talk about how you draw on the realities of Key West, not only but place, but the people, you know, that you meet who become sort of a fabric, a texture in the fabric of these books.
Well, I think Key West, when I pitched this series back in, let's see, when the first one was in 2012, one of the things they liked was Key West it's not showed up in a mystery series before. And it's just such an interesting, quirky place. It's an island, so it's insular. A lot of people know each other, so you can't get away with too much. And yet there are a ton of visitors who pour in, especially over the holidays. So, for example, in the Key Lime crime, which takes place between Christmas and New Year's, I took the Citizens Police Academy and also the Key West Ambassador Program and found out all kinds of interesting details. Like there are something like 25,000 people live on the island. It swells to 100,000 in a peak moment like New Year's Eve. So to be able to put all that craziness as backdrop is really helpful. And it's different groups of people come at different times, but underneath all that are the locals, and some of them are real, like my police officer character, Steve Torrance, is a real police officer who's also the minister of our church. So I bring him out. Lorenzo, the tarot card reader, is a real person. His name is actually Ron, but he reads cards for tourists down at Mallory Square every sunset. I don't know if either of you guys have had your cards read, but you should. He is one of the most intuitive people I've ever met. So as I've gotten to know him, I'll take him to lunch and he just talks, and I write notes and say, oh my gosh, that's so good. Like Key West is an island, so it's called a thin place, a place where earth and heaven are very close together. And sometimes that's covered over by Duval Street and all the drinking, but underneath that, you have a lot of interesting spiritual stuff, and he shows that side of it. So, and there's a lot of art. There are many good restaurants. So it's not really a small town, but it has a little bit of a small town feel, and it's beautiful. And there's so much conflict.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's crucial. There are rich people, there are homeless people, there are people who hate the cruise ships, people who come in on the cruise ships. So if you need to find a murder suspect, you just open that newspaper and you take your pick. So I have really enjoyed using it, the real thing. And people warned me, are you sure you want to use the real place? Angelo is always more worried about me getting sued than I am. But, I think a lot of people like going there and using what I put in the book as kind of a tour guide. So I think it's worked out well.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we went a couple years ago and we did see Lorenzo. He had quite a line. So, well, you know, Ron. But it was sort of a mind bend to be like, oh my gosh, you know, we've read about him for all these books and there he is in the flesh, which is really, really cool. But it's fun to, you know, to read about it and then to actually be there and sort of experience it in the way that Haley might. And I wanted to ask you too, Ange, so your book is set in Connecticut and specifically around the South Norwalk area, which apparently is called SEONE. I am so behind the times. I did not know that. But, you know, you sort of mentioned that you had to reacquaint yourself a bit with that area too. So can you talk about setting and how it lends itself to this story?
Sure. Well, I had to reacquaint myself because Annette went to Norwalk School of Nursing. So we go way back to Norwalk and in the Westport area, and it was fun getting back there and learning about it. And since then, SEONE has developed, and it's very gentrified now and everything. Which I told you the dogs would bark. And then right. So we loved it. We had a lot of great times back when she was in college down in that area. So I said, well, that would be a great place to set the story. But Quincy's hometown is Sachem Creek, Connecticut, which I based on Stony Creek, Connecticut, which is right down the road from us. And that too is a small town, and it has a lot of conflict because New Yorkers come in for the summer, and all the parking spaces are gone, and but yet the people want to have the visitors come in because it's good for business. So and the story goes between the two places, between Southwest and Central Connecticut.
Sure, and I'm going to stick with you for a moment, Ange, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you about your characters and sort of the romantic entanglements, because both of them have relationships with law enforcement individuals. So Quincy, I don't know if I want to call it a relationship. It's complicated, but can you tell us a bit about, what the dynamic is between him? He's a divorcee, and he is in sort of this on-again, off-again relationship with Sergeant Nina Estevez. So tell us about that.
Right. Well, Quincy moved down to Norwalk from Sachem Creek because he had been divorced, and the only thing that he got out of the divorce was his dog. And so he moved down there because he did know Mary from before, and that will come out more in the second book. And he went down there to live, and it was closer to New York now that he had this job with the magazine, so he could commute back and forth. And when he's down there, he goes to this little luncheonette every morning, and he meets his girlfriend there, and he gets to talk to her. And it took a long time for the relationship to build, and it's an on again, off again relationship. And now she's moving up in the ranks in the police department, and she doesn't have as much time. So it gets very complicated. But I didn't realize until you asked the question that, yes, Lucy and I borrow from each other, I guess, or I borrowed from Lucy. And we always mention that. And I didn't realize that I did that I had a law enforcement relationship in there the same as she did.
But it helps when you have an amateur sleuth who really doesn't have any business trying to solve a crime to have a law enforcement person you could turn to.
Sure.
So I think that's why so many of us do it.
Oh yeah, it definitely helps. And let me ask you, Lucy, you have Haley, and she, things started kind of rocky in the relationship department with her at the very beginning of the series, but she's sort of, come full circle, and now she's married and honeymooning, with her husband, who is a police detective, Nathan Bransford, and of course they take Miss Gloria, which we'll talk about in a moment. But tell us sort of about her evolution in the world of romance, and how having her and Nathan together can be both a help and a hindrance in these books.
She came down because she'd met a guy in a bookstore in New Jersey, and they fell in lust or love or whatever. And he said, why don't you move to Key West? And she moved into his condo with her cat, and it was a disaster. And she was out on the curb within 6 weeks. So then she had met Nathan Bransford because she became a suspect in the first boyfriend's new girlfriend's murder. But she also carries a torch for Wally, who is her boss at the magazine. So I was going along in, say, the first 4 books saying, okay, it's going to be Haley and Wally. And a fan wrote me and said, do you realize that there is no chemistry between the two of them? And if you're going to go on in that direction, I'm not going to read anymore. So I was taken aback, but I really thought about it and said, yeah, where the fire is with Nathan. So that's been a slow evolution. He doesn't like her getting involved with criminal activities because it's dangerous. But I think in the book that I'm finishing this month, he's beginning to realize that she is particularly talented at watching people and noticing things and also getting people to talk. So I think they're going in the direction of being able to work together a little bit more, although she'll never be invited into the police department. So some of it is, we don't try to force what happens with those characters, but watch them and listen to what people reading say about them too.
Sure. And I'm going to stick with you for a moment, Lucy. So, we've mentioned Miss Gloria a time or two, and actually in both of your books, there are sidekick characters of a certain age. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how their presence, enhances sort of the quality of the narrative and also brings a bit of levity to the stories. And for instance, Mary and Miss Gloria are a bit different. We'll talk about that. But Miss Gloria is pretty much, beloved by everybody. And she is very actually integral to A Scone of Contention. She's even more prominent in this book than some others. So can you just tell her what she adds to sort of the overall experience of these books?
So in that first book, An Appetite for Murder, when Haley gets kicked to the curb by the boyfriend, she moves to share a houseboat with her old college roommate. And on that same dock, Miss Gloria lives, and I still am not sure exactly how old she is now, but she's older than 80. I don't want her to age too fast, and I'm certainly not going to kill her. That would ruin me. So in that first book, I really only put her in there for local color and because somebody needed to be bopped on the head, and that was Miss Gloria. And then she kept coming back, and at some point, I forget which early book it is, Haley actually moves in with her and becomes her roommate. And she's the funny character. She has all the best lines. It's like, I know what she would say. She's funnier than I am, but she makes people laugh, but she never minds trying something new. She is somebody in a review wrote, she's a role model for senior citizens. If we could be old like Miss Gloria, it wouldn't be so bad. So I would say I hear the most about her. She's also very much in touch, as I mentioned a little earlier, with her intuition and her spirituality. She takes people on tours of the Key West graveyard. So she connects with the people who have gone before us. And this is a big event that happens in Scotland. And she was the perfect one to be in that scene.
I love Miss Gloria. So it's nice to know, she will live on forever.
Never going anywhere, no.
And so, Ange, you mentioned Mary Ticcarelli before, and I want to ask you about her because, it's a funny dynamic that she has with Quincy because, she sort of exasperates him at some points, but she also really, saves his skin because she is sort of the presence behind cooking with Betty and, sort of where he goes to get these great recipes and insights into food. So tell us a bit about their dynamic.
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say that I love writing about old people. I think almost everything I write has an old person in it. And as I'm getting older, I like it even more. And I'm understanding where they're coming from. But I think that Mary and Miss Gloria are a little bit alike in that they like to be helpful. They could be a little outspoken sometimes, and they could and they're funny. The difference is that Mary is more rough around the edges than Miss Gloria is. But what was your question again?
I have no idea. No, I was just wondering if you can tell us, how their dynamic really plays into the story.
But she's kind of a mother to Quincy, isn't she? Or a mother figure.
She is. She's more of a mother to him, and she sees herself in that role, and she pushes him along. I mean, she doesn't have to help him out with these recipes, but she wants to, and she wants to see him succeed. But she's also frustrated by him because he's not always a self-starter, and I think that's where she fits into the picture.
Yeah, and she's fun too because she just kind of tells it like it is, and he could get conked over the head in the street and walked in and she'd tell him he looks like crap. I mean,
yeah, she does.
It's fun.
and she's, fixing his head and,
Lovingly,
trying to
but
help him out and everything. But all the while she's telling him, you have to start watching out what you're doing. You have to pay attention to your surroundings. And so she's warning him at the same time.
That's right. She keeps things real. She tempts and taunts him with food that may or may not actually exist, which I kind of love. But all right, let me come back to you for a minute, Lucy. I wanted to ask, this is the 11th book in this series, and you've written far more beyond that, whereas it's a first book in a series for Ange. So can you talk about, how you keep something fresh over this course of time? Obviously, taking to Scotland for a book is a way to do that, but that's 1 out of 11. So what gets easier over time, and what is more difficult as a story like this evolves?
I love writing a series because I did not plan out ahead how the characters would evolve, but that happens as I'm writing. So I feel like I know them so much better than I did at the beginning. And the part of the writing that's the most interesting to me, the thing I always start with in a new book, is what's happening with Haley and her relationship with her mother and the other family members. And I'll think, okay, who have I not brought to the front? And for example, in the Scone of Contention, it was Nathan's sister, who had a tragedy when she was a teenager and has been separated from the family ever since. So that part I love. Also, Key West has so many events and different qualities that it's not hard to shift the focus. But in the last book, the Scotland book, I was feeling a little burnt out about writing about Key West. The key lime crime was very exciting, and I told you it was set at New Year's, and I went around and tasted all the key lime pie on the island, and I needed something else. So I asked my editor and agent, what do you think about setting one of the books, at least partly, in Scotland? And they both said, well, there might be some people who would object to not seeing more Key West. But since it's this far in the series, I think you could do that. So I did. And just as they predicted, some of the feedback was, where's Key West, which I put at the beginning and the end. But for me, the writer, it was so refreshing to be writing the same characters, but in a different place. And I feel like it's given me new energy for the next book. I don't know if, Angelo, if you've noticed that, but I haven't felt stuck at all with going back to that setting. It's been fun and exciting.
That's terrific. And it's a great bookend for the book.
There's precedent for that. In Murder, She Wrote, she's always going to different places. So, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, some people don't like it, but for even Louise Penny, who is a huge success, took her characters out of that little town of Three Pines to Paris, which I loved because I love Paris. But you have to figure out how you reasonably are going to get all these people somewhere else. And that's one of the...
You worked that out. That was great the way you worked it out.
Yeah, honeymoon makes perfect sense. And like you said, Key West is the bookends to the story. You start there, you end there. And there's some interface with characters throughout the book too. I guess that's the beauty of FaceTime and things like that. And so how about you, Ange? So you're basically building a whole new world. So what are the greatest joys of that? And what are the greatest sort of challenges when you have to create something from nothing?
Well, I'm not totally creating from nothing in that Sachem Creek is based on a real place, Stony Creek, but I could take more liberties. I could put an island someplace that doesn't exist. I could, people will say to you, oh, that's a one-way street. How could he be going down that street? Yeah. So I have that flexibility to do that with Sachem Creek, and it's appeared in many of my short stories in the past. So I know it very well. And that's similar to what Lucy is saying, when you've already written about something, and you know it well, it makes it a lot easier you already have that in what's called your Bible, of places and people that you have. So you could use these over and over and you're comfortable with them. So that's one thing. And now I don't have 2 books in a row. I have 2 books, but they're different. They're not written as a series yet. But one thing that I do know is that if you're writing a series, there are certain things that you can't do. And I've seen this, from all of the books Lucy has written, like your protagonist can't be a false narrator and could never be the criminal in the end, because
Right.
that's just not going to work. And there are certain characters that you could bring over. You could have a minor character change, I suppose, how they are, all of a sudden become a villain, but that's usually not done.
And can I ask a question of him, John?
Of course you can.
Do you keep a Bible about your characters?
I do because I use Scrivener,
Oh,
Scrivener, yes. And so I have everything, it's in your head, right? You don't have it
it's
written
in my head, but talk about an unreliable narrator. My head. I wish I had kept closer. That's one of the hard parts of a long series, is I wish I could remember all the details, but I'm not a detail person. So I can, it helps that you can search a manuscript. It also helps that you can go on Facebook and say, does anybody remember what happened in Death with All Its Trimmings? Or Ange and Chris sometimes remember things that I don't, but that's a hazard of a longer series.
Sure. I mean, and your readers will remember. They often know far better, but it's funny because the people who don't keep a Bible always say that they wish that they had, because who remembers eye colors and educational background and things like that? So, all right. So I want to ask, sort of a crafty advice question, because a lot of people who tune in are aspiring writers or who may be looking for their own creative fulfillment. So I'll start with you, Ange. I just want to ask you, what is the best advice in terms of a creative life or a writing life that you've ever gotten? And then the best advice that nobody ever gave you, it was never gotten, but you had to learn it for yourself throughout the process of writing.
Well, the best advice was don't give up. I mean, I was 72 years old when my first book came out. So that was good advice. Don't give up, don't give up. And Roberta has always been encouraging, and so has Chris, keep trying and don't give up. Probably the worst advice was don't give up, because it's a lot of work. And I think that's what I have learned. I've learned that, I think everybody can write. We all have it in us, but you have to have a discipline, which Roberta has, that I'm still working on. Roberta will write every single day. She has her 1,000-word at least count per day and everything. Whereas I might say, oh, it's nice and sunny today. Maybe I'll go for a walk down Stony Creek and hope I get inspired by something. I work better if I have a deadline, if I know that I have to have this done, and then I'll do it. So I think discipline is a big thing that I had to learn.
Sure. And same question for you, Lucy.
Because I was a psychologist before, and I was interested in how people get things done in sports and other things. I know what a sports psychologist would say, which is to set yourself an overall goal. That is, supposing I want a book on the New York Times bestseller list, take that bestseller list out of the paper and post it up on your wall so that your mind knows what you're shooting for. But then that's too big of a goal, and that can make you crazy. Right. So then you have to break it down to small goals. And that's what Ange was saying about the 1,000 words a day. Even if you have a contract, although having that deadline, like I have a book to turn in September 1st. So I know that has to happen. but nobody tells me how to make that happen. I have to figure that out. And that is say, okay, how many days of 1,000 words a day is it going to take me to have a draft? And I want it to be early enough so that the writers group can look at it. And also, yeah, that's the main thing. So cutting it down to small goals. And we all are friends with Hallie Efron, who is a great writer, but also a great teacher. And the best advice she gives to people is just hold your nose and write, because the first draft stinks. Nobody's comes out. I don't know about Stephen King, but the rest of us, it comes out like garbage, but that can be fixed, whereas a blank page can't be fixed.
True.
So I love that advice.
I just tell people I write in invisible ink.
No, John, no.
Doesn't work like that. Anyway, I'm sorry. You were going to say something else. Please do.
I don't know what it was. You got me off track.
I do that, and I apologize. I don't know if it was something that you learned throughout the process, that maybe nobody told you before.
Yeah, which is sometimes it helps. Like we try to do this in our writers group, but I also blog with the Jungle Red writers. And lots of times a group of us might be feeling stuck at the same time. So if you set a goal, a joint goal, everyone could have their own number of words that they want or pages. But if you set it up so that you could check in at the end of the day and say, yes, I got it, or no, I only got 750, then you can get a lot of support and encouragement. And that, to me, is the name of the game, because it's so lonely and hard to be doing this by yourself. So I love those connections with other writers.
Sure.
That's true. Many times I'll say, well, I have to get this done because I need something to bring to the group.
Right.
And so,
that's right. Support, encouragement, and accountability.
Yeah, which I hope is going to be part of book 2 in this series, Ange. Are you bringing that next week?
I will bring you something for next week. I have a great title that Chris Falcone came up with, right? Ingredients of Murder. So I'm working on that.
Oh, nice. I know. And look at that. She put you right on the spot. I mean, we've all seen it. We'll be checking in with you next week, Ange, to see how that went.
I have to bring it.
So final question for you both. We started with what's new, so of course I'm going to end by asking you what's next. You've both alluded to what you might be working on now, but if you can just give us a brief teaser, and I guess we'll start with you, Ange. This might help you for next week.
Yeah.
What's coming up next?
Yes.
What you're saying? Well, as I mentioned, I jumped ahead of your question. I anticipated it, I guess. Yes, I'm working on a sequel to this. I had started a sequel to When It's Time for Leaving, in which I said wasn't working for me, and I hope to get back to that someday. I'm calling that Writers in the Storm.
Book. Yeah.
And also, I'm working with Susan Lesky and Leslie Wheeler on the Best New England Crime Stories anthology, which comes out in November, and it's going to be called Bloodroot.
Terrific. And I have to ask, so your character, Quincy, is writing on a book that's really not working for him too. And I kept reading that and thinking that sounds familiar. Is that the actual other book that you intend to write someday?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. I thought I picked up on that. That's terrific. I love these little meta elements that run throughout the book.
I haven't gotten to see that new version, so I'm dying to see what he's working on.
That's terrific.
And that's fun. Yeah.
All right, and you tell us, Lucy, so number 12, you said you feel sort of re-energized. So give us a little hint, if you might.
Number 12 is called A Dish to Die For. And I'm really sorry they didn't take your title, John, because it was so good.
I love that title.
John suggested Conch and Circumstance, which would have been perfect. They love puns. And conch is both what the natives are called in Key West, but it's also obviously food. But for some reason, everybody loved it, but my editorial team. So I'm sorry about that. Maybe she could write something herself that's called Conch and Circumstance.
There you go.
Anyway, it's called A Dish to Die For, and it opens with Haley has Nathan's dog up the keys, a few keys, and they're walking on the beach with a friend, and the dog disappears. And it turns out the dog has discovered a body that's buried in the sand. So that's how it starts. It has a lot of scenes in the Key West Women's Club, which I had never been in before I started writing this. And it's a beautiful building on right on Duval Street. And it was Ange who said, they did a cookbook, and he sent me a link to this cookbook on eBay, which I instantly ordered. And that has become a big focus in that book too. So that'll be out next summer. And then there's an old book that I had worked on and sort of given up on called Unsafe Haven, which is more gritty and dark than the Cozy series, that is being published by an English press this fall. It'll come out in England in September and the US in December, and it's called Unsafe Haven. So that will be interesting to see how they're using the same name, Lucy Burdette.
Right.
So I hope people aren't shocked and appalled when they read it. It's a little dark, isn't it, Ange?
No, I don't think it's really dark. I think it's more edgy. That's all.
Yeah, well, a teenage girl giving birth in a subway station is pretty dark.
Well, okay. All right.
It happens every day. But it's funny because I saw the cover of that book and I saw the name Lucy Burdette, and it's not the cozy that you would.
Shocking, isn't it? No.
But that's exciting. And in the meantime, we're going to come back to these books, see if I can hold two up at once. People can catch up on your newest. So, Ange, we have Diet of Death. Lucy, we have A Scone of Contention. People should pick them up. Great beach reading, great escapist reading. And thank you both so much for being here, my friends. It was a delight catching up with you.
Wonderful, John. Love you.
It's fun.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.